Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 147, recording on Monday, February 16th, about a week until I go to Indianapolis for the Scouting Combine. We will do live shows from the Combine in Indianapolis a few days next week, so looking forward to that. I mean, it's one of my favorite weeks of the year. For those of you who don't know, I wouldn't think of it as much as like I'm sitting there with a stopwatch watching the 40-yard dash. It's more weaving through hotels in Indianapolis and meeting with executives, player personnel, people, agents, coaches, reporters, you name it. Probably a conversation with somebody in the NFL will be going on next week in Indy. So always enjoy it. The side aspect of getting a shrimp cocktail at St. Elmo's does the job. So looking forward to being there and to doing shows from there with anything and everything that we hear as in relation to this team. On today's show, just going to hit a bunch of Q&A subjects that we've gotten over the course of the last couple of weeks. I've put out the calls on social media, and you guys have responded exceptionally as usual. So I thought I would just hop right into those, and it'll be quarterback, roster, cap, all of that. And we'll try to dive into anything and everything over the course of this show. First question comes from Douglas McClure. Douglas asks, how confident are the Vikings in Blake Brandel / Michael Juergens at center? Do you think they will pursue a veteran or look to draft one? I'd say, if the Vikings were to turn it over to somebody currently on the roster at the center position, Blake Brandel seemingly would probably be the guy there. But I just would not be surprised if the Vikings did not try to seek a center option in free agency, someone who is a more veteran candidate, someone who would be able to provide some stability on the front. I mean, I've heard some of this conversation of folks who talk about the league, specifically Nate Tice of Yahoo we've had on the podcast, talk about the importance of the center position. I can't agree more. Like, the more I've covered the league and the more I've watched it and just talked to people within it, the more I have felt like having a great center is like having a good catching catcher and pitch calling catcher, where it doesn't really show up in the stat sheet, but it influences pitcher performance on a week, day-to-day, week-in, week-out basis. So there are some available free agent centers in this class who are intriguing. Those guys are obviously going to have competition. I'm talking even beyond like the Tyler Lindenbaum big name type of spin, because given the Vikings cap scenario, it's kind of hard for me to fathom that they would pony up the amount of dollars it's probably going to take to acquire a guy like that. But just think, drafting a center, I wouldn't say that's not a possibility, and drafting another developmental center to be able to learn from somebody who was signed to more of a short-term deal definitely makes sense. You're just asking a lot to turn the reins over to someone who is new at this level with a position that encompasses as much like mental processing, football intelligence as the center position does. So that's what I'd say. And that's not to take anything away from Michael Juergens. I mean, he filled in admirably last year at times. Just if this team wants the offensive line to take a massive step forward and kind of buoy the offense in general, turning it over, that's kind of a bold to turn it over to Michael Juergens would be pretty bold. So that's the way I'd answer that question. Jay Erickson asks, would the front office, who seem to be fans of the passing game, pass on Jeremiah Love if he fell to them at number 18? First of all, Jeremiah Love, for those who don't know, is an absolutely electric running back in the draft coming out of Notre Dame. Just such a dynamic player, can pass catch out of the backfield. You can think of him and this is lofty praise, but in the vein of like a Bijan Jahmyr Gibbs explosive weapon that lifts the ceiling of everything you can do offensively. The first component of Jay's question on Jeremiah Love is, can't imagine he gets the number 18. I personally, just based on everything I've seen and everything I've heard and read, I personally would be surprised if he made it out of the top 10. But even with teams in the NFL, quote unquote, devaluing the running back position the way that the narratives have seemed to insinuate over the last, what have you, 5 years, when you can find an explosive weapon like a Bijan, like a Jahmyr Gibbs, passing up on that guy is just, it's not the smartest circumstance unless you are just so far away from a team building perspective that you take a more premium position. So if he was there at 18, I can't fathom why the Vikings wouldn't seriously consider it. Just wanting to be in the market for the best player available. But again, just it's hard for me to really believe that a guy like Jeremiah Love of that talent caliber would get to number 18. Next question comes from Eric Hansen. Eric asks, given the cap space, new GM, QB situation, can this offseason be a busy or active one for Minnesota, or will they be limited in what they likely can accomplish? I do not at all expect this to be a quiet next month. Um, I'll lay out the date. So it's February 16th. Sunday, everyone flies to the combine. That entire week is flush and ripe with conversations of team personnel, like I mentioned, agents, everybody, and typically where the understanding of the marketplace tends to happen. Then there is kind of a week tie-over period where oftentimes players can be cut within that period so that they're available for free agency. And then the legal tampering period begins March 9th, and that's when all the flurry of activity will begin a long ways prior to the draft. So I expect it to be busy, and here's why. The Vikings are $40 million over the cap, which is the most of any team besides the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, you can look at that number two ways. The right way, in my opinion, to look at it is not like it's some red alert. The Vikings are in peril cap wise. A lot of their contracts of young players and I would say organizational players are structured in a way to be able to counteract some of this cap situation. So the team could restructure money for guys like Justin Jefferson, Christian Darrisaw, Will Fries, Byron Murphy, Jonathan Grenard, a bunch of guys to create more cap space. But when you're 40 million over, you're probably going to make some roster cuts, which is going to add to the activity. Then they're going to have to do some restructures that we just mentioned from a contract perspective. And then this team obviously has a bunch of needs. It's quarterback, obviously. We'll see what happens with Javon Hargrave at defensive tackle. We'll see what happens with Ryan Kelly at center. We'll see what happens with Aaron Jones at running back. Let's say there's a potential pay cut for a guy like TJ Hockenson. That would be a move. And then in the event that Harrison Smith is done and CJ Ham's done, are you looking for a fullback? Are you looking for safety? What about cornerback depth? So to Eric's question about whether there will be a lack of activity given the Rob Brzezinski being the interim GM, no, I see this as a very stay on your toes type of month. If you're a social media notification person, like probably need to be very locked and loaded for some of that stuff, just considering all of the moves that will have to be made. And it's going to be a big one for this team to get it to a place, get the roster to a place for 2026 that is sensible. I will say this, and I said this on the radio on Monday morning. It feels to me like there is somewhat of a inclination for you guys maybe who are beaten down by this team not getting to the mountaintop understandably, or not even getting to the playoffs in 2025, to be like, a little bit, you want to just remove yourself and why should I follow this, etc. I know the goal should be, has to be, will always be getting to the Super Bowl and winning a Super Bowl until this team does that. But there is, for me, just looking at everything, a fairly sensible path to a double-digit win season in 2026 and a playoff berth if you get middle tier level quarterback play, if the defense can sustain the level at which they played, if the running game can be even, you can lean into that even more, be a little more creative in the run game, which the additions of staffers like Frank Smith and Derek Warheim, I think, can contribute to that. So as long as the quarterback play improves and there is not an immense fall off in some of the other phases of the team, and even you think about variance going the right way from a health perspective on the offensive line, I, I I'm not sure I see it as like jumping over a mountain to get to a place at which it is a double-digit win 2026 that inspires faith. It allows you to be nimble moving forward. So just something that's been a little bit on my mind. I mean, I myself, even covering the team, like, you ride the wave of the emotion, and a lot of that's, you take a lot of that from how the fans feel, but it's just looking at the roster, stacking it up with others, looking at the cap broadly, thinking about the 9 draft picks to supplement with youth, thinking about what the quarterback has provided the Vikings under Kevin O'Connell when it has been a more veteran type of option. Like, all of that stuff adds up to a product that might have more potential than maybe it feels, given the depths of 2025, is kind of how I would um, describe that one. Let's see. Roger asked, how likely is it that TJ Hawkinson plays for the Vikings in 2026? So TJ Hawkinson's cap number right now is around $21 million for 2026, which would be the highest cap number among all tight ends in the NFL. It you know, I think his 2025 season is pretty murky to evaluate because of the amount of work he had to do as a chipper on the edge, helping in pass protection, just trying to lift the offensive line and protection to a certain floor. But I also didn't think that he probably had, the most wiggle as a pass catcher in contested spots. It wasn't always the most reliable. So I can't fathom that he plays on that $21 million cap number. The idea of having to replace him at tight end with someone who knows the system, I mean, that is somewhat of you'd be taking a leap in doing that. You might be able to find someone who could fill that role, but how much are you paying them and what is the value there? So the way I view it is, you probably have Rob Brzezinski, Matt Thomas, Emily Battis sitting down with TJ Hawkinson's representation, and what type of pay cut is he willing to take? And then how do those negotiations play out if TJ wants to be back, and if he's willing to shave off some money? That would make sense. If he's not, then maybe you're forced to move on. But the way I project it now, even though I if you guys' perspective is a certain way, my projection would be that it would probably be most likely that TJ Hawkinson would be on the team for 2026 at a different cap number. Let's see here. One of the questions, most intriguing draft fits for the Vikings, maybe a mock draft would be cool. So I actually, I'll pull this up. I did a mock draft at The Athletic last week, and some people probably were okay with it. Some people maybe weren't. I'll run it through really quick just so you guys who didn't read it at The Athletic have somewhat of a perspective. But made 9 picks. First round, Jermod McCoy, cornerback, Tennessee. Second round, Blake Miller, tackle, Clemson. Third round, Kyle Luis, linebacker / safety, Pittsburgh. Third round, running back, Emmett Johnson, Nebraska. Fifth round, Bud Clark, safety from TCU. Sixth round, defensive tackle, Grayson Halton from Oklahoma. And then 3 7th-round picks, James Brockmeyer, a center from Miami, receiver Tyron Montgomery from John Carroll, and then tight end Carson Ryan from BYU. Some of the people obviously were frustrated by the idea of a guy like Jermod McCoy, who is a cornerback from Tennessee, coming off a torn ACL injury. And that was the hang up for a lot of people, understandably. Like, we're really going to draft another guy coming off of an injury at that position. And I can understand that perspective. The reason I chose Jermod McCoy at 18 was, A, thought it'd be possible that he gets there. B, the tape in 2024 is fantastic. He's got really good ball skills. He's really fluid. He can play man. He can play zone. Just felt like he's not afraid to tackle. Felt like a really good fit for a Flores type system. I also, a guy like Mansour Lane from LSU as a cornerback, he fits that prototype. Um, I'm trying to think of others. I need to watch more Avion Terrell from Clemson to feel comfortable with that one. But, I also don't think that it's a guarantee that the Vikings take a cornerback in the first round. Part of the reason that has been the most common and likely mock, I would say, is because there are a lot of cornerbacks in that 15 to 20 range who are talented players who make sense as fits. So that's what I'd say. This show is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area run by really good people. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson, they can't wait for the combine coverage and to hear what happens with the quarterback situation moving forward, to hear what Rob Brzezinski and Kevin O'Connell have to say there. But just a really good banking platform in First Resource Bank. They have an awesome online kind of interface and branches all over the place. So please go check out First Resource Bank. Their information is in the description. This show is also sponsored by Unreal. I'm repping it right here. Got the lightweight hoodie on and has been awesome for me throughout these winter months. But they've got limited edition drops. I saw they're having an in-arena Minnesota Wild drop when the hockey folks get back from the Olympics. So stay tuned for that. But Unreal, we appreciate their support and their sponsorship. And you can find this show on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, iHeart. Please subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. It helps us out. Let's get back to the podcast. The other guys I thought who were really good fits on this mock draft that I did, Emmett Johnson, the running back from Nebraska, I loved his tape. It really popped for me. Really good vision, explosive. Could probably get him in the third round or what have you. So I really liked him, and I didn't know he was a Minnesota native before I put that in there. So it was nice to see that. Kyle Luis is kind of like a Josh Metellus type player, where he's almost too small to be a linebacker, but kind of too big to be a safety. So just think that would be a intriguing one, I would say, for Brian Flores. A guy Grayson Halton, the defensive tackle, who I had in here from Oklahoma, like he didn't play a ton of snaps at Oklahoma. So like if I was part of the Vikings draft process, I'd be trying to figure out from Brent Venables and that staff, like, why didn't this guy play more? Because as a one gapping type defensive tackle, weirdly, he kind of reminded me of Jalen Redmond, another dude who went to Oklahoma. So he's a name who was definitely interesting for me. I just got done last night watching Peter Woods, who like coming into this year was kind of the consensus number one prospect from everybody. He didn't have a ton of production this past year, and like ESPN's Field Yates just did a mock draft and he was 26. But Peter Woods is like a 6'3", 315, violent hands. He's light on his feet. Not sure he's the prospect that Byron Murphy II was, and he's different than Kalijah Cansey. But like the Vikings over the last few years have definitely been intrigued by finding an interior defensive tackle who could be kind of a stalwart for the future. I mean, if you look at Brian Flores' history, when he was in Miami, they drafted Christian Wilkins. And so the value that he places on that position is pretty obvious. And while the Vikings still have Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave for now under contract for 2026, I mean, being able to find a young player at that position, you can see it throughout the NFL. Like the two themes of teams that have won Super Bowls over the last 10 years, you either have the elite quarterback play, or you can get after the passer with four-man pass rush. And so to be able to pair someone with Jalen Redmond, a guy like Peter Woods might be interesting. And again, that's just based upon the tape. And that's what's so hard in the external evaluation of these guys is you might love the tape of a player, but does everything check out? What do the coaches say? What does the character look like? And so much of that also goes a long way to informing what teams do. I also say this, like D'Angelo Pons, the Indiana cornerback who's like 5'9", and really, the measurables are the only drawback of that guy. I could see a person like Brian Flores and a staff like the Vikings loving a guy like that who can, again, play off coverage, is so unafraid to tackle even at that size, is very sharp, has the pedigree of having just won a national championship, is a dog, has never cared about the path that he's taken. Like, I don't know where you would take that guy. I don't know if you'd have to allocate a second round pick on him, but just the idea, I mean, the Vikings, and size didn't sway the Vikings away from Isaiah Rodgers. So they love fluid, fast, competitive ball skills, instincts, smart type players on the edge. And just could see that guy being a fit. It's just going to be a matter of, do the Vikings have the draft capital, and is he available at the spot to make that happen? Got a question from Danny Carlson, who is always a trusted listener and reader of the Alec Lewis show, and so we appreciate him. I thought it was a good question here. Could you see a scenario with Harrison Smith gone that Flores moves to using 3 cornerbacks more versus 3 safeties and prioritizing that in the draft? He has gotten by with mediocre cornerback play up to this point, really only playing 2 guys, but I think that was partly due to the strength of the safety room. Agree. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Brian Flores, and how he always is going to approach it, is what does his personnel look like, and how can he get the best 11 on the field? And if that is 3 safeties and 2 cornerbacks like it's been over the last couple seasons, like that he's going to find a personnel, that's going to be his personnel group, and he's going to find a way to use that personnel grouping to the Vikings' advantage. I absolutely think that the Vikings could shift in some ways. They're just going to have to have the cornerback depth to do it. Like, if you're designing your entire defense for 2026 based on having 3 cornerbacks, you got to have multiple depths because of depth. Yeah, you got to have good depth there, because if one guy goes down, then that entire plan is like a Jenga tower and it's falling apart. It's probably going to depend heavily as well on how much surplus cornerbacks and safeties are there in free agency, who can you acquire there and at what position, and then how does that inform how you can allocate your draft capital in the draft. What I will say is this: Brian Flores, regardless of whether you're playing 2 safeties or 3 safeties, that position has always been the primary communicator position on his defense, going back to how New England operated. So I have written and I have said that if the Vikings are to spend salary cap space through free agency on a defender, safety does make sense, because that's where you can find an experienced player, someone who you would trust to communicate on the back end. So, yeah, I how I'd summarize that one, Danny, is the way the Vikings allocate their resources, salary cap wise, and via draft capital. To me, just like it did last year with their spending on the defensive tackles and cut and trading of Harrison Phillips, and choice not to re-sign Jonathan Bullard, like that was a declaration of the type of defense that they want to run and the type of personnel they want to run it. So just will be fascinating to kind of look at where, what they're spending on and why over the course of the next few weeks and month and change or so. Someone asked on the Instagram, how realistic is Kyler Murray? He would be the starter automatically, question mark. So the first thing regarding Kyler Murray that I would say is his contract situation is the first thing you got to talk about here. Again, the Vikings are $40 million over the cap. And while they have a lot of levers that they can pull to be able to alleviate things, to have enough room for draft picks and some potential signings, etc., Kyler Murray's contract is as follows. I'm going to pull this up while I'm speaking to you so I have it right, because it's an important one, just in terms of how you think about Kyler Murray as a possibility. So in 2026, he is going to have a guaranteed salary of $36.8 million, the way his contract is currently written. Again, to reiterate, the Vikings are supposed to be $40 million over the cap. imagine adding $36.8 million for 2026. You're up to $76 million in cap space that you got to free up. Now, do I think Rob Brzezinski and Matt Thomas and Emily Battis could find ways to save money, find space in the couch cushions per se? Yeah, I do. But I mean, that is a lot to work through. And then what does that leave you everywhere else? The other component of Kyler Murray's contract as it currently stands is on March 15th, $19.5 million of his base salary becomes guaranteed. So not only are you committing the 36.8 for 2026, now you're on the board for 19.5 in 2027. Some of this can become moot, I would say, if Kyler Murray is eventually cut. Like, let's say that the Arizona Cardinals can't find a trade partner and they get to a place at which it's like, you know what, we just have to make this move right now. So if they did that, they could post June cut them. I mean, it is a massive dead cap hit that they are undertaking, but that would then leave Kyler Murray to the market, and then it becomes a choice for him. Does he want a long-term deal with financial security that a place like New York that has $70 million in cap space could be willing to provide him? Or would he be willing to do the Daniel Jones type of option where you're taking a 1-year rental prove it deal in a really good situation that could set you up for the future? So I'd say the Kyler Murray conversation, it really is going to be contingent upon, and the realistic component of it is in my opinion, it's going to be contingent on how do things work out with his contract and with the Arizona Cardinals? What would that entail? You just, by comparison, I would just weigh it like this. If you're taking on $36.8 million in guaranteed salary for Kyler Murray, you got to weigh that versus, let's just say, the idea of a Mac Jones. Let's say the draft compensation were somewhat similar. His guaranteed salary for 2026 is $1 million. So that's a $35 million gap. And you're starting to then ask yourself internally, if you're an organization, how much of a performance difference are we getting between those two guys? And maybe the Vikings or any team deems that there is a massive, gigantic difference between performance between those guys, or maybe they don't. But those are the types of conversations. It is, what is the level of quarterback play? What is the cost? And what fits kind of with what the Vikings can offer? Now, I've said this. This is just my personal take watching the tape. Like, Kyler, the talent is obviously there. How healthy is he? Does he have the quickness that he can have at his optimal self? Like, that stuff is important because he isn't the most read it out and be just surgical with precision and rhythm and timing and decision making. That's not really his game. But that also doesn't have to be your game to be a talented quarterback in the NFL, which he has been. That's just undeniable. Like, you can look at what he's accomplished in the NFL, and it's a pretty sizable body of work that is not something that you can just totally sniff at. I mean, I understand the Call of Duty narrative and is he the most team oriented guy? All that stuff is valuable and meaningful. But I mean, this is a guy who 4 of his, let's say, 7 years in his career, he's thrown for 3,700 plus. He's completed 65+% of his passes throughout his career. He's a 67.1% completion percentage guy. Again, these are statistics. I get it, but it's not something that you can entirely sniff at. And you can just, you could fathom, placed in an optimal circumstance, could he perform and produce? Like, I definitely think he could. And it hasn't been fun over the last few weeks to write about the possibilities when you're weighing Kyler Murray, Mac Jones, Geno Smith, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr. I mean, I've said this on the podcast in the past. Like, I'd be curious if any of those guys really hit you in the ear well. And if they don't, it's part of the byproduct of being in the situation that the Vikings are currently in. I personally am of the belief that plugged into the Vikings system, all of those guys who are veterans and who have experience would have varying levels of success with this situation, with this coaching staff. And there are aspects and components of the tape of all those guys that would give you a fair level of reliability. I mean, Geno Smith, you go to the 2024 tape, he's pushing it over the middle of the field. Mac Jones, he pushes it over the middle of the field. Derek Carr, same deal. Professional type of operation. Kirk Cousins, same way. Are they top 12 quarterback play? Probably not. Are they 13 to 20 range quarterback play in this system with these surroundings? Yeah, potentially. And then if you have a really elite defense and your run game is more improved and your special teams is capable, you can probably get to the playoffs and restabilize things into 2027 if that's what you're trying to do. So, I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see what they would do, but I think that's the prism that you can probably view it in is if all these guys are hovering in somewhat of a middle tier, what is the cost? What is the team dynamic, and how does everything kind of sort through in that regard? I'll probably hit a couple more questions here before we hop out. Let's just see here what we've got. Let's see. If this offseason were a headline in October, what do you think it reads? Vikings go all in or Vikings play the long game? It's maybe a cop-out, but like whatever headline is probably threads the needle within those worlds is probably sensible. Let's see. What is the likelihood of Jonathan Grenard getting an extension? I'm going to pull up his contract really quick. It's something I've looked at in the past. I would say like a guy like Brian O'Neill, probably more likely because I believe his contract is due to run out after 2026. But Jonathan Grenard, so he has a $22 million cap number for 2026. His salary becomes guaranteed March 13th, $4 million of it. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably going to like if Jonathan Grenard and his representative Drew Rosenhaus believe he's owed a kind of a new deal, could that be a way for the Vikings to secure a key player and ease up some cap space? Yeah, so I'd say I would never rule it out with a guy like Jonathan Grenard. I mean, he's such a tip-pole figure for what this defense has done and wants to do and has become. Obviously, they have the depth with Dallas Turner, who plays a similar role, but Jonathan Grenard, when he is healthy and playing at his premium level, is, I mean, not the type of guy that you can just find all the time. So, think pretty highly of Jonathan Grenard, and it'll be interesting to see from a contractual standpoint what he wants to do, and if the Vikings believe he is part of a component to reworking the salary cap situation, obviously, into 27. Question-wise, that'll probably do it for this rendition of the Alec Lewis Show. Appreciate you guys being here, and we'll be back later this week with the guest talking Vikings quarterback situation, and then live from the Combine next week. Can't wait to be there. Can't wait to do it. Until then, we will talk to you very, very soon.